A 17-year-old girl took on a part-time job during her summer break and mysteriously disappeared without a trace. For months, police and dozens of residents from her small town searched everywhere, but it was like she had vanished off the face of the earth. Meanwhile, investigators were unraveling a tangled web of strange and conflicting clues until they finally uncovered the shocking truth. Valerie Tyndall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana. She had a big, loving family: her parents, a brother, and 4 sisters. At some point, they decided to leave the big city and move to a tiny town called Arlington, about an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With only a few hundred residents, Arlington was a quiet, peaceful, and safe place. Valerie enrolled in the local school, made friends, and grew to love the small-town life. As a teenager, she started taking on various part-time jobs to earn her first paycheck. She initially worked at local restaurants before landing a job with a lawn mowing company. This job was perfect for her. It had a flexible schedule that fit well with her school hours, and operating a lawnmower didn't require any special skills or much effort. By 2023, when Valerie was 17, she was working hard to get good grades so she could get into a college to become a veterinarian. She had loved animals since childhood and had long dreamed of becoming a vet. That summer, during her school break, she was busy researching colleges and continued mowing lawns to save up as much money as she could before heading off to college. On June 7th, Valerie told her parents she was heading to work, said goodbye, and left. Her mom expected her to be home in a few hours, but as the day went on, it became clear that something was wrong. Valerie wasn't answering her phone, and as evening approached, her mom decided to call her boss. Valerie worked for a neighbor and family friend, Patrick. To her surprise, Patrick told her that not only had Valerie not shown up for work, but she didn't even have a shift scheduled that day. This news made Valerie's parents even more worried. They feared something bad might have happened, but held on to hope. Her mom considered the possibility that Valerie might have lied about going to work and instead spent the day with friends, even though she'd never done anything like that before. In the end, they decided to wait, hoping their daughter would come home soon. They also called everyone she knew, but no one had seen her that day. So by the next morning, when Valerie still hadn't returned, they decided it was time to call the police. After speaking with Valerie's parents, the police considered the possibility that she might have gone somewhere secretly or even run away from home. Her mom mentioned that Valerie usually didn't work on Wednesdays, but she assumed her daughter had just picked up an extra shift that day. The officers also talked to her boss, who confirmed that Valerie had no scheduled work that day and had last worked on Tuesday. The police questioned her friends and acquaintances, but none of them had seen Valerie or spent time with her. Given the small size of their town, the officers quickly interviewed everyone Valerie might have been with, but it led nowhere. The only lead they managed to find was a witness who saw Valerie driving by around noon on the day she disappeared. But unfortunately, this didn't bring them any closer to finding out where she was. As days passed without any sign of Valerie, the police became increasingly convinced that she wasn't going to return home on her own. Investigators began focusing on 2 main theories: that she had either run away or that foul play was involved. Valerie's parents were skeptical about the idea of her running away. There were no issues at home, and she had been working hard in school to achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian. However, the thought of her running away still gave them a glimmer of hope that she was alive and safe, because the alternative was far worse. For several weeks, the police, along with Valerie's family and volunteers, searched tirelessly around their town. Authorities also asked local residents to help locate Valerie's car. The fact that no one had spotted her vehicle in the small town suggested that Valerie had driven it out of Arlington herself, or someone had hidden it. Nearly 3 weeks later, on June 26, the police finally found Valerie's car parked at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, about 20 miles from Arlington. The license plates were missing and the doors were locked. There were no signs of a struggle or any useful clues inside the car. but detectives quickly uncovered an interesting detail. The apartment complex where the car was found was a client of the lawn mowing company where Valerie worked. Despite this, Valerie's boss, Patrick, had insisted she wasn't scheduled to work that day. The investigators began to suspect that he might be hiding something and started looking more closely at him. After interviewing residents in the area around the apartment complex, they found another witness who had seen Valerie on the day she disappeared. But she wasn't alone. Her boss, Patrick, was in the car with her. Hearing this, the detectives went to question Patrick. He stuck to his story, claiming he hadn't seen Valerie that day. But when the police informed him that a witness had placed him with Valerie and that her car had been found, his story suddenly changed. Patrick admitted that he had indeed seen Valerie that day. According to his new version of events, they met up in Shelbyville, and Valerie asked him to drive her to a small town called Homer, a few miles from Arlington. She claimed she was planning to run away from home and that someone would be waiting for her there. Once they arrived, Valerie got out of his car and into another vehicle driven by an unknown man, and they drove off together. Patrick added that the next day, he picked up Valerie's car and left it in the parking lot of the apartment complex where the police later found it. He insisted that he was only trying to help her. But investigators quickly spotted inconsistencies in his story. They had already checked the location data from Valerie's phone, which showed that it had last been active in Arlington, not in any other town. This suggested that something might have happened to her in Arlington, and they confronted Patrick with this information. To their surprise, Patrick changed his story again. This time, he claimed that they met near the apartment complex in Shelbyville, after which Valerie got into his car and they drove to his house. He then left Valerie at his home alone when he went to work, and when he returned, she was gone. Naturally, the detectives found this version even less credible than his previous ones. They asked Patrick to hand over his phone, and he agreed. The detectives found text messages exchanged with Valerie on the day she disappeared. At 11:23 a.m., Valerie had sent him a message saying, "I'll be there soon." And a few hours later, Patrick had replied, "Where are you?" He sent the same message again a little later, but there was no response. All of this raised serious suspicions, and the detectives were highly doubtful of Patrick's truthfulness. They decided to speak with Valerie's parents to ask if they had noticed anything unusual about Patrick's behavior. Valerie's mom shared that Patrick did sometimes act strangely. He had built a close friendship with Valerie, spending time with her outside of work, giving her gifts, and even taking her shopping. Sometimes, the 59-year-old man seemed to behave more like a jealous boyfriend than a boss. However, Valerie's mom didn't take these concerns too seriously. Patrick was a close family friend, and Valerie was friends with his daughter, so her mother assumed he was just being supportive. Yet, one particular incident stood out to her as especially suspicious. Patrick once invited Valerie to visit an aquarium in another city. Her parents allowed her to go, thinking that Patrick was taking his entire family, but they later found out that he went alone with Valerie, which her parents found quite odd. Valerie's mom also mentioned that on the night of June 7th, Patrick and his wife came over to visit their house, where he suggested that Valerie might have run away and might never come back. She also brought up one curious detail that caught the detective's attention. Patrick had been tracking Valerie's phone location through a special app. He claimed this was for work purposes, but the detectives immediately noticed something strange. If Patrick could simply open the app and see where Valerie was, why did he send her several messages asking, "Where are you?" on the day she disappeared? After piecing together all the information, the detectives were nearly convinced of Patrick's involvement in Valerie's disappearance. However, with only circumstantial evidence and no clear idea of Valerie's current whereabouts, they couldn't yet hold him accountable. Still, the police decided to arrest Patrick for providing false statements, as he had broken the law by lying about not seeing Valerie on the day she vanished. He was formally charged, and the police continued to think what to do next. This move was largely driven by the detective's hope that after his arrest, Patrick might eventually tell them the truth. But he continued to insist that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The next step was to obtain a warrant to search Patrick's home, but this process proved difficult. Without any solid evidence, it took several months. Eventually, the police uncovered another suspicious detail. Several of Patrick's neighbors reported that the day after Valerie disappeared, he dismantled and burned his garage in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Finally, on October 11th, the police secured a warrant and went to search Patrick's property. His house sat on a vast piece of land with a pond in the middle. 4 search dogs immediately indicated that there was a scent of human remains coming from the water, so investigators focused their search there. However, no remains were found in the water. The expert suggested that a body might have been near the pond at some point, causing the scent to seep into the water. The police then expanded their search across the property. They requested a helicopter equipped with ground-penetrating radar, and from the data collected, they created a map highlighting areas with some signs of digging. Given the size of the property, the search extended for several weeks. This continued until November 28th, when the police focused their attention on a large pile of construction debris mixed with soil. After clearing the debris, they uncovered 2 wooden crates beneath it. The first contained old VHS tapes and documents, though the police have not yet disclosed their contents. In the second crate, they found human remains wrapped in black garbage bags. The level of decomposition made it impossible to visually identify the person, but the detectives noticed the nails of the deceased were painted in the same color as Valerie's on the day she disappeared. The remains were sent to medical examiners, who quickly confirmed that they belonged to Valerie Tyndall. Following this confirmation, Patrick was charged with her murder, and the detectives brought him in for questioning. Now that Valerie's body had been found on his property, Patrick did not deny his involvement. However, his account once again raised serious doubts. According to his account, they met that day near the apartment complex in Shelbyville for work, after which they went to his home, where his office was also located. Patrick claimed that Valerie began to blackmail him. He insisted that she had been trying to seduce him for some time, and that on that day, she demanded a new car. If he didn't comply, she threatened to tell everyone he had seduced her, destroying his life. Patrick said he panicked, and a heated argument ensued, escalating into a physical struggle. In the midst of this, he grabbed his belt and strangled Valerie. Afterward, he moved her body to his office and hid it there. The next day, he went to a store, purchased some wooden boards, and made 2 makeshift coffins. In one, he placed Valerie's body, and in the other, he stored documents and old videotapes. He also wrapped the body in garbage bags and duct tape to mask the odor of decomposition. Patrick then decided to hide the crates in a pit that was already on his property, but he needed something to cover them. So he used the construction debris, which was plenty on his land, and buried the coffins under a layer of soil to secure them. As for the burned garage, the purpose of his action remains unclear. Given that he burned it shortly after the murder and in the middle of the night, it likely has some connection to the crime. Perhaps he needed to destroy certain evidence, and the garage demolition was just a cover for the large fire. It's worth noting that the pit where he buried Valerie's body was only 100 yards from her parents' home, who had been searching for their daughter for almost 6 months. When police asked him how he felt after committing the murder, Patrick calmly stated that nothing in his life had really changed. Naturally, the detectives were skeptical of his entire story. It all seemed like Patrick was trying to portray himself as the victim, justifying his actions by claiming he was being blackmailed. A far more likely scenario was that Patrick had been ingratiating himself with Valerie for some time, hoping for a romantic relationship. On the day of the murder, he might have brought her to his home and attempted to initiate an intimate encounter. But when Valerie refused, he panicked at the thought she might tell her parents and decided to kill her. Another detail that cast doubt on Patrick's version of events was the testimony from Valerie's relatives. They mentioned that she loved her car and even said once that she wanted to drive it for the rest of her life. This made Patrick's story about being blackmailed for a new car seem even less believable. After charges were brought against Patrick, detectives uncovered several more intriguing pieces of evidence that further built the case against him. A thorough examination of his smartphone revealed that shortly after arriving home on the day of the murder, Patrick began deleting apps from his device. Although, he failed to remove his health app, which recorded a significant spike in his heart rate for several minutes shortly after his arrival. Investigators believe that this was the moment when he killed Valerie and moved her body. Patrick also admitted to disposing of the license plates from Valerie's car and her keys by throwing them into a river, intending to make it harder for the police to locate the vehicle. He also revealed a chilling detail. After strangling Valerie with his belt, he just put it back on and continued wearing it as if nothing had happened. The victim's parents were devastated to learn that their neighbor and friend was her killer. They admitted that they had never truly believed Patrick was involved, despite his strange behavior. It's important to note that detectives had kept most of the information from the parents to avoid compromising the investigation, so many details only came to light after Patrick's arrest. When Patrick was placed in jail awaiting trial and was appointed a lawyer, he didn't attempt to retract his confession, as is often the case. Instead, he and his lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Patrick would plead guilty to the murder, and in exchange, the charges of giving false information, for which he was originally arrested, would be dropped. Thanks to this deal, Patrick stood before the judge on March 11, 2024, just a few months after his arrest, and was sentenced to 57 years in prison. While the victim's family didn't have to endure years of waiting for the trial and the defense's attempts to justify Patrick's actions, the plea deal came with a significant drawback. Typically, such agreements don't require the guilty party to disclose all the details of their crime. Patrick only needed to admit his guilt in the murder. Because of this, Valerie's parents may never know the real reasons behind the crime, even if the investigator's theory seems closest to the truth. As for Patrick's family, they too were horrified when the police discovered Valerie's body on their property. His wife and children, including his daughter who had been friends with the victim, had lived just yards away from her remains for nearly 6 months, completely unaware. The plea deal also means we may never learn what was on the tapes that Patrick buried in the second coffin alongside Valerie. It's possible their content could have brought additional trouble or even criminal charges, and Patrick may have feared that the police would search his home following Valerie's disappearance. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.